All right, folks, this could be a fun one. 2007 Honda Odyssey. She's a little bit RUFF, if you know what I mean. Oh, man. So this thing came from another shop. It has some codes for the oxygen sensor heaters, and it had some codes for the rocker arm oil solenoid pressure sensor. The other shop, they replaced that sensor. Starts and runs. It's a little bit rough, but it's running normally. If you mash the gas here, well, hold on, let me show you some data. If we look over here at the fuel trims and stuff, everything's pretty normal, you know, within reason. But if you give her a couple of, oh, we didn't even have to rev it up, there it went. So right now it's stuck in some kind of a limp mode, and the idle is high, like 1200 RPM, and it won't rev above like 3400 RPM. And it has no power when it's in this limp mode, like no power at all. So yeah, that's fun. Anyway, if you look at the air-fuel ratio sensor for bank 1, it's like pegged out as high as it can go, or higher than I've ever seen anyway, 3.8 amps. Yeah, these numbers are kind of hard for us to understand here in North America, where we're used to dealing with narrow band O2 sensors. But I think the higher the current on a Honda, the richer it is. But then if you look at the lambda, it's showing a lambda of 2. So anything above 1 is lean, right? I think. Then if you look at the fuel trim for bank 1, it's only at 5%. So I don't know what's going on. It's surely an open loop. Anyway, it seems to be some kind of a limp mode, default mode that it's stuck in right now. Yeah, so it's running normally now. Well, I don't know. It doesn't sound very good. There's a thumping, banging sound under the hood. What's she got? Yeah, 254,000 on the clock. Okay, there it is. Right there. We're in our limp mode. Isn't that crazy? That's it. Foot to the floor. And it's not just because we're sitting here idling. If you put it in drive and take it out on the road, it won't go above 3,500, and it shifts real harsh. So yeah, something wrong. I guess let's I don't know. Let's follow the codes. Oh, see, we still have that rocker arm oil pressure switch problem. I don't know. Yeah, the seats are all missing out of the back. The wheel bearings are completely wasted, or the tires or something. It really howls going down the road. Anyway, let's I guess let's follow the codes first. I know that the The heater is extremely important for an air-fuel ratio sensor. Like they usually won't work at all without the heater. So let's see where that takes us. We're back in the nice warm shop, and things are making a little more sense. So we have 3 codes to work with here. P0155, bank 2, sensor 1, heater circuit malfunction. P0161, bank 2, sensor 2, heater circuit malfunction. And then the P2647, rocker arm oil pressure switch A, circuit high voltage VTEC system stuck on. Whatever that means. Anyway, let's deal with these first 2 codes. I was trying to think about what these heater circuits have in common, and I didn't come up with much. So if you look at the wiring diagram, this is bank 1, but it's the same idea on the bank 2. They all share the same power feed. They come from the same fuse, but the ECM controls each heater circuit individually. So yeah, I don't know what they have in common, other than they are both unplugged. Hopefully you guys can see it. There's the sensor 2, and there's the sensor 1. Yeah, so that'll do it. I don't know why they're unplugged, but they certainly are. So I guess I'll talk to the other shop and see if there's something going on with those O2 sensors. But I bet if we plug them back in, those 2 heater circuit codes are going to go away. I cleared the codes. We're going to watch the O2 sensors, and we're going to watch this rocker arm oil pressure sensor. That should be what's setting our P2647 code. That seems normal. Should be equal to the engine oil pressure. So 50 pounds is pretty good. So the bank 1, sensor 2 is starting to wake up. Still no bank 2. Yeah, still no action on either bank 2 sensor. And our oil pressure is now down to 10.4. I believe the minimum is 10 psi. So that's not good. There's no low oil pressure warning light. But we're now down to 7.5 pounds. There it is. Yeah, so our oil pressure went up, but I suspect that's because the RPM also went up. And just like before, sensor 2 went to 0, sensor 1 went way high, and our P2647 is back. Cool. Well, let's see if we can figure this out. So the pressure sensor that we're after is back there, and that's been replaced. So the shop that had it before me, they replaced that pressure sensor. So I don't think it's bad. And the wiring, I believe, is also good. If I unplug it, it goes up to 130 PSI. So I think the wiring integrity is good. There's a solenoid here. We have a test we can do, this solenoid activation test. So we're going to try that. So it's supposed to click. Yep, I hear it. So that seems to work. What's the problem? Here's what I think's happening. And I'm not a Honda engine expert, so I'm probably going to butcher this. But the code we have is for the VTEC system stuck on. And that is very misleading because this engine does not have VTEC. At least I don't think so. If it had VTEC, it would have more sensors and solenoids over here on bank 2. VTEC is Honda's system that uses engine oil pressure it changes the geometry of the rocker arms, similar to what we do now with cam phasers for variable valve timing, but Honda's been doing it for decades. Anyway, instead of VTEC, this engine has VCM, variable cylinder management, and it can turn off the 3 cylinders on bank 1 under certain circumstances, just for better fuel mileage. So it actually uses oil pressure to change the rocker arm geometry, and I believe it shuts off the compression to those 3 cylinders. And what I think's happening is when it goes into that limp mode, the computer sees low pressure on that sensor and it thinks that it is stuck in variable cylinder management mode. It thinks that the 3 cylinders here have been switched off via the rocker arms, that they don't have any compression. And it's shutting off the fuel and spark to those 3 cylinders. It also bumps up the RPM at idle, I guess, and then it also limits the maximum RPM to 3,500. I couldn't find anything in service data that references that limp mode, but that's what I believe is happening, is the computer thinks it's in VCM, so it's cutting the fuel and ignition to those 3 cylinders. Even though they still have compression, it's basically switching them off. I don't know why it doesn't set any misfire codes or, lean bank 1 or anything like that. Maybe that's part of the limp mode. It stops monitoring those things once it goes into that limp mode. I'm not sure, but that's my theory. Here's a schematic of the VCM system. Again, I'm probably going to butcher this, but I'll give it a try. It looks pretty similar to your classic VTEC. You got a computer-controlled solenoid here. That seems to control a spool valve. It's like a pilot control. And the spool valve controls the flow of oil. The oil pressure shifts a pin inside the rocker arm. And I think in this case, it actually just disconnects the rocker arms. And that's how it turns off the cylinders. It just stops the intake valves from opening. The thing is, and don't quote me on this because again, I'm not a Honda expert. I think in your classic VTEC, it's a one-way hydraulic system. So it sends pressure out to shift the pin, and then it stops the flow of oil and a spring pulls it back. This system seems to be double acting. But the problem is it only monitors the pressure on one side. So you got a sensor here, your EOP sensor, engine oil pressure. That's what we were monitoring on the scan tool, the one that went all the way down to 4 PSI. But there's only pressure there when the engine's in the normal mode, the 6-cylinder mode. When it shifts to VCM and turns off those 3 cylinders, the oil flow reverses and there's no pressure at that switch. But there's no pressure sensor on the opposite side to tell you if that's working or not. So I'm not sure why they do it that way. That's kind of crappy. I'm also not sure why this is a 3-wire sensor. In your classic VTEC, I believe it's just a switch, just a 2-wire switch. Anyway, the problem is I guess that we have low pressure here during the normal mode, and the computer is interpreting that as the VCM being active, even though it's really not. And there's a few things, I guess, that could cause that. So the first cause could be just low engine oil pressure. You know, the whole engine oil pressure could be so low that what it's seeing here just isn't enough to keep it happy. I don't think that's the case. I believe there's another oil pressure sensor. It should be down by the oil filter. It's a 2-wire switch, and that will come on, well, that will turn on the light on the dash, the oil warning light. And we're not seeing that, so I don't think we have low base engine oil pressure, although it's got a pretty good knock to it, so maybe not. Anyway, the other problem could be that the spool valve is shifted a little bit, like it's not returning, and as the engine oil warms up, it's kind of dumping the pressure out here like what it would during the VCM mode. The other option is that maybe there's just a big oil leak somewhere in this system and it's bleeding off the pressure. But I think the most likely culprit is there's a screen here, kind of like a filter, that screens the big chunks out of the oil before it comes into this solenoid housing. And I think that may be plugged up. So anyway, what I'm getting at is I think we should pull this VCM solenoid housing off the engine. We'll get a look at the spool, we'll get a look at the screen, see what we can figure out. The pressure sensor has already been replaced. I don't think that's the problem. I mean, it seems to be reading normally. If I disconnect it, it goes up to 130 psi, so the wiring integrity seems to be good. There's something in here. There it is. Not much to it. Does have some damage to the gasket here. Yeah, I don't know. There's some gunk in there, but it's not too bad. I don't know. That seems normal too. I don't see any real scoring on it. I guess we better check the oil pressure. Yeah, that's not what I was expecting. Thought we were going to find some big chunks of silicone in there or something. Alright guys, I went ahead and reinstalled the VCM valve body. I just don't see anything wrong. The spool looks good. The solenoid looks good. We know the solenoid's working mechanically. The pressure sensor is good, I'm sure. Yeah, I just don't see a problem. I did clean out the screen, but I doubt that little bit of junk I knocked out of there is going to make any difference. Anyway, we're going to set up and take a manual oil pressure reading. I think there's a port, usually there's a port down by the oil filter we can tap into. I don't know why they make it so hard to take a manual oil pressure reading. I cobbled up enough adapters, I think we got it. Hopefully it doesn't leak all the oil out. Ruh-roh. Son of a biscuit. That is not how I thought this was going to turn out. Why does the low oil pressure light not come on? That's what I don't understand. All right, we're gonna start it right back up while the oil's hot. We'll see what happens. No, sir. That is no good. No good at all. Wow. I would not have called that. No kidding. All right, folks. I think we're done. And so is this van. At least that would be my guess. It's got lots of problems. That wheel bearing is completely shot. Tires are pretty decent, but all the body work is smashed up. This engine is, she's tired. Very, very tired. 254,000 miles. It leaks oil pretty much everywhere. Somebody's put valve cover gaskets in it, which makes me think it's probably had the timing belt replaced at least once, but I don't think we're going to be able to save it. You heard it when it was running. It's definitely got a knock to it. I wasn't sure if that was valve train related. I'm going to guess it's in the bottom end. Probably why we don't have any oil pressure. Yeah. That's a bummer. I bet that's the end of the line for this old girl. These 3.5 Honda engines they're stupid expensive to buy a used one. And I doubt it's worth putting one in this old pig. I mean, like I said, she's pretty RUFF. Well, crap. I hate to be a downer, folks, but I don't think this one has a happy ending. Man, I didn't see that coming. I thought for sure we were going to find a plugged up screen on that control valve and we'd just clean it out or replace it and we'd be off to the races. Yeah, it didn't work out that way. I guess we could try a thicker oil, you know, like a 15W40 or maybe even a 20W50. I think it normally runs 5W20, which is about as thin as it gets. I don't know, that might get him by for a while. Maybe there's some kind of snake oil he can pour in it that'll magically rejuvenate it. I'd say it's the end of the line. And like I said, these 3.5 Honda engines used are pretty pricey, at least in our area. And if you're going to swap one out, it's quite a bit of work. Plus, you're going to have all the normal Honda stuff, so you're probably going to need a timing belt and a tensioner and water pump and valve cover gaskets and set the valves. And, you know, I'd say $3,500, maybe $4,000 to put a used engine in this van. I doubt it's worth it, but I guess we'll let the customer decide. I did talk to him and told him what I found. He said that they do change the oil regularly, and this issue just kind of popped up out of nowhere. I don't know. It's a new customer. I've never worked on this van before. I don't know why the bank 2 O2 sensors were unplugged. The other shop didn't know anything about that either. So that's a mystery. I don't know why the only codes that it set for the O2 sensors was for the heater circuit when they were unplugged. That doesn't make much sense. It seems like they're not working anyway, so maybe there's a wiring problem, or I don't know. Well, I think the AF sensor was working, but that downstream was doing nothing. Doesn't matter. I also don't know why the P2647 code sets before the low oil pressure light comes on. I don't know how low you had to get to turn that light on, but we were down to, I think we were down to around 4 PSI and it still hadn't come on. So that doesn't seem very good. I also don't know why or what exactly happens when it goes into that limp mode, when it sets the P2647 code. Like I said, service data says nothing about that, so I don't know what the parameters are, you know, if it can clear itself from that. It doesn't really matter. I think we're done here. So thanks guys for watching, and I'll see you next time.